Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news hour, we shall be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. In the open editorial page, this article talks about how the freebies are affecting the economic growth and whether they are justified, and are the states being correct in providing freebies to various sections of the people. Let's go into the details. Whenever the elections come in, we see the various states providing freebies in the forms of loan waivers, subsidies, and other stops to the various sections of the people to attract the voters. And while delivering a speech in Delhi School of Economics, the chairperson of the 15th Finance Commission, N.K. Singh, here said that the race to provide freebies to voters could be a quick path to fiscal disaster. It will spoil the entire financial health of the state governments. And freebies would be in the long term, they would be harmful for the economic growth. And we need to distinguish between those freebies which provide productivity to the economy and those are unproductive in nature. So there is a debate here. We'll look into it. What is the reason for the deterioration of the state's financial health, and are the freebies, that is the subsidies and other free things given to the people, reason for that? So the authors very quickly distinguish between different kinds of freebies. Those are ones which are productive in nature, and those are which are totally unproductive and unjustified in nature. And as long as the welfare spending of the states is sustainable and affordable, it is totally fine. The problem arises only when the state is in such a bad position financially, but still it is providing freebies to the voters just to attract the votes. Then that would be a problem. When the state is having good financial health, it is having good number of revenue streams, then even providing freebies would not affect the financial health of the state much. What is fiscal stability? It is a situation in which the government is able to properly use its fiscal policy towards the achieving the long-term growth of economics, and in order to provide high employment and growth rate in the economy. So there we have the stability of the economy, providing high employment to the people through the higher growth rate. That is fiscal stability. And how the government uses this, the revenue and expenditure, in order to make this happen is the fiscal policy. And the authors give the trend of the spending by center and states. If you observe from 2005 onwards, in aggregate, the states have adhered to the fiscal limit of the gross fiscal deficit in the FRBM Act, but the center has been continuously breaching the FRBM Act limit. And even when it comes to the central government debt, the limit was supposed to be 40%, and now it has crossed to 90% for the center. When it compared to the states are just above their limit, and they are in a much better position compared to the states when it comes to the debt to GDP ratio. And the authors again put up importance that those populist measures which are taken with elections in mind are questionable, but at the same time we need to understand that there has been rising inequality in the last 30 years, and some kind of relief to the population in the form of subsidies is totally justified. It will be in fact necessary to continue the economic growth. For example, when we know that the rural demand, the consumption demand is very low, the only way to increase that would be providing some welfare schemes to the rural people, or through increased spending in the MG Narega scheme, which would directly impact the rural incomes. So providing freebies sometimes might have a direct impact on the economy and growth rates also. The authors say that even the center is engaging in providing freebies not just to poor people but also to large number of corporations. And if we can see the schemes like MG Narega and others, and the public distribution, the PDS system, which provides free food grains and food grains at a minimal cost to other section of people, they have in fact contributed in reducing the poverty impact. And we should also see that the growth aspect in reducing the poverty, and we just discussed that by increasing the consumption demand in rural areas, we could increase the growth rates and because of increased growth rates the incomes could increase, which will again lead to fall in the poverty. And the authors in favor of increasing spending on those productive subsidies, for example MG Narega. If we increase spending on MG Narega, and if we give the more quota or ration of food grains, it will increase in the productive capacity of the population. It will help us in having a more healthier, stronger workforce. This is just like state spending on education and health, which will have positive impacts on the economy. So these type of subsidies which are productive in nature have to be encouraged, and those subsidies which are not productive in nature, which are just done to attract the voters during the elections, they have to be reduced. For example, there have been various researchers showing that the free subsidy in the form of electricity in various states to the rural communities, it has led to some disastrous consequences. It has led to declining in water table because of the free electricity. The farmers have been pumping out more and more water from the ground levels, and that has led to declining in the water table at the rural areas, and wastage of electricity and deterioration in the soil quality, and it has led to all other environmental challenges, especially in the Punjab regions. And few of them question the subsidies like giving laptops to students. And now in the age of this digital era, some of the times it has become necessary for the people to have this laptops and other tabs etc. in order to increase the productivity, knowledge, skills. At the same time, there are wasteful subsidies like giving 200 to 300 units of free power to middle class and urban population who are already income earners. They don't need this subsidy, and this would not have much impact on their incomes. This is a wasteful expenditure. Such type of waivers have to be avoided. Again, when it comes to the farm loan waivers, one author is on the impression that such waivers lead to wasteful expenditure, but other author is on the view that farming is one of the extremely risky venture in India, even compared to manufacturing and investments in services. When the manufacturing company is not able to pay the debt, we can restructure the debt, we can delay the payment, or we can reduce the interest rate. But farming which is majorly dependent on monsoons which are erratic is not so. Farming is extremely risky. So at that point of time the state governments can go for loan waivers to farmers. And sometimes even crop insurance has not helped the agriculture sector in getting out of the monsoon shocks. And we need to spend more on the sector expenditure. And when it comes to social sector expenditure spending, the center has been lower spending compared to the states. Here the states have been doing a better job. So the authors finally conclude saying that we cannot finally put all the freebies into one basket. We have to distinguish between what is productive, what is not productive, and we have to increase the productive subsidies and reduce the wasteful subsidies. Here in this article again, it discusses about how unseasonal rainfall during the mango season and the lemon flowering season has led to the fall in the flower itself, so the crop productivity ultimately fell. And the heat in the northern part of India and the unseasonal rainfall in the southern part of India has impacted the flowering season of mangoes and lemons, and finally it had impact on the crop yields. Because of the lower crop yields, now there is less supply of the crops in the market, because of which the prices of mangoes and lemons are high now. In text and context page, this article is about the Russia cutting gas supplies to Bulgaria and Poland. We have been discussing about how the European countries are dependent almost to the extent of 40% of their natural gas on Russia, and now because of the escalating conflict and these countries not agreeing to pay Russia in rubles, Russia has cut gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria. So how would it impact the Poland and Bulgaria in the present times? Poland gets 40% of its natural gas from Russia, and currently even though it has supplies and it will get gas from Germany currently, it will lose out on the 5 billion cubic meters of gas, and it would impact it in the future. Bulgaria is almost 77% dependent on natural gas imports from Russia, and it will face a bigger problem. Even though the country has enough reserves for another month, it has to look for alternatives, and currently looking for alternatives for natural gas is not that viable, and even if they import from LNG from USA, that would be very costly. Why has Russia targeted Poland and Bulgaria? Poland has been sending military supply and hardware to Ukraine and sending tanks to Ukraine. Bulgaria also supported the Western sanctions against Russia, and they hoisted the Western fighter jets and a new NATO outpost on the Black Sea port. And these countries did not agree to pay in Russian rubles. So Russia said that because you're not paying us in the rubles, now we are going to cut gas supplies to you. So will Russia impose the similar sanctions on other countries? Currently, Russia sends gas to almost 23 countries in Europe, and currently, as of now, only Hungary has officially agreed to make payments in rubles. But even other four European nations, they have started making gas payments in rubles, and almost 10 European countries, they have opened accounts with the Gazprom banks to make payment in rubles. So if the countries pay Russia in rubles, Russia will continue supplying gas. At the same time, Russia cannot entirely cut the gas supply to these countries because Russia's economy is majorly dependent on gas, and losing out on buyers would impact the Russian economy itself. So it is a risk that Russia is taking. So what would happen if Russia suddenly shuts off gas to more countries? We should see that the natural gas for Europe majorly comes from Russia, Norway, and Algeria in South African continent. And Russia accounted for almost 40% of Europeans' gas imports. And the dependence of countries on Russian gas varies from country to country. For example, for Finland it is almost 94% dependent on Russian gas, and for Netherlands it is just 11%. In this graph we can see here how Finland's 94% of gas supplies come from Russia, and we can see here Bulgaria's 77% comes from Russia, Poland's 40% of gas comes from Russia, and finally countries like France, Netherlands and Romania, they are very minimally dependent on Russia. And for the entire EU, the imports of natural gas comes majorly from Russia, and second they come from Norway and Algeria majorly, Qatar, and the remaining are LNG imports from USA, etc. So if Russia cuts the gas supplies for more and more countries, what would it mean? The disruption in supply would mean that increased inflation in fuel for the European countries. It would damage the economic activity of the countries. Probably then the countries have to go for energy rationing, and the per unit cost of gas for the European country would be higher, and probably then the European consumer would put impact on their governments to continue trading with Russia. We just have to wait and see what would happen. And a country like Germany, which is majorly dependent, its entire economy can go into recession. And what are the steps that Europe is taking to reduce its dependence on Russian gas, if at all it is taking any steps? As we discussed, the energy mix majorly comprises of oil, which is 43%, natural gas, which is 24%, then nuclear energy 14%, and hydroelectric, which is 4%, and rest comes from the renewable energy sources. But in Europe, there is major support for the climate change activism, and European countries cannot go for coal for generation of electricity. The people of Europe itself would not support the initiative. So the Europe, it can also not go for nuclear energy because of the lack of public support. So Europe is left with natural gas and oil, and getting oil from the Qatar and USA is not very viable and it is costly. So it is majorly depend on natural gas as a possible fuel, and mainly the heating requirements of the domestic households, it's dependent on the Russian natural gas. Even though Europe is increasing its storage capacity to 80 to 90% of the capacity, it would still get pipe gas from Norway and North Africa. It won't be adequate to completely reduce the dependence on Russia. It would still have impact on, it would still be dependent on the Russian gas. And longer term strategy would be to import the LNG from USA and Middle East. But at the same time, is it feasible and possible to import LNG from Middle East and USA at cheaper prices? No. It is easier and cheaper to transport gas via the pipelines, but LNG, that is the liquefied natural gas, requires massive facilities and container ships that require huge capital investments because of the geographical regions. And building several terminals, the European nations have already taken initiatives, but at the same time, sending the LNG from the US through the container ships would mean more expensive. That means the per unit cost for an European consumer would increase. So if at all Russia suspends the gas to European nations, how would it impact Russia? As we have already discussed, Russian economy is majorly dependent on the revenue from gas, and any cut on the sanctions and any fall in the export of gas would directly impact the Russian economy. So it is a risk that Russia is currently taking now. It can help Russia or it can backfire Russia. Just time will tell what will happen. Demand for revenue share in the privatized airports. Recently, the center came up with a policy wherein it wanted to privatize few airports in Tamil Nadu, and the Tamil Nadu government has said to the center that they also need a compensation out of the revenue that they get from privatization. So the argument of the state governments here is that whenever they are giving airports to the Airports Authority of India, it is the state governments which acquires land and it transfers it to the center or the Airports Authority of India. So the now state governments are saying that apart from Tamil Nadu, state governments like Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, they have also said that when you're privatizing the land, when you're totally selling the assets of the airport to a private company, that means you are also selling the land which was acquired by the state government. Here, even though the center had invested for the capital expenditure of the airport, the land expenditure and the acquisition of the land by the people from the people was done by the state government, and state governments incurred cost there. So the state governments have to be fairly compensated. So whatever is the sale value, out of this the fair amount has to go to the state government. This is the argument of the state governments, that if you are going to privatize the airports, we should get a fair share for the value of our land from the seller, and whether it can be in the form of equity or it can be in the form of bonds or any other measurement, but they need a fair chunk of the revenue that the center is going to get. That's about this article. In the news page, Center's employment survey finds addition to of 4 lakh jobs. The Labor and Employment Ministry's quarterly employment survey was released, and it was noted that almost 9 sectors made up for 85% of organized sector employment in India, and out of that manufacturing was the highest with almost 40%, then education was the second highest with 22%, and we can see that other sectors like IT, BPO, health, trade, transport, financial services, restaurant and construction, these 9 sectors accounted for almost 85% of organized sector employment. And the survey was conducted in firms where 10 or more people were employed, and this did not include firms which are established after 2013 and 2014. And the survey also noted that almost 4% of the jobs remained vacant due to non-availability of the skilled workers. So this is an untapped potential and opportunity wherein because of the lack of skills, the jobs remain vacant. This is a sad state of affairs, and here is the opportunity for us to upskill and reskill the workforce, so that even the vacancies which are currently not filled because of lack of skills, they also will be filled up. And all this shows that there is a rising trend of employment in the organized sector. In the business page, the Competition Commission of India is raiding few of the Amazon's top sellers. It has been alleged that the companies like Cloudtail and Apperia Retail, of them, the major stake is held by Amazon. So, as per the rules, it is unfair for a third party reseller app like Amazon to give favorable access to a particular company and having a stake in them. So it is like indirectly you are promoting your own companies on your own website. wherein you had to play a neutral third party just by connecting the buyers and sellers, because it would be unfair competition for the other sellers. Now there are allegations that the Competition Commission of India has conducted raids, so we'll just have to wait for the other news. Previously also, it was alleged that various anti-competitive practices taken by Amazon and Flipkart. For example, it was alleged that they preferred sellers on websites and giving priority listing to certain sellers in which they had stake. For example, Cloudtail and Apparel Retail. We'll have to wait for the more news on this issue. Reporting of cyber breaches made mandatory for all the firms. 13. The Indian Computer Emergency Response Team has made it mandatory for all the service providers of internet, intermediaries, data service centers, corporates, government, and all the other organizations to mandatorily report any incident of cyber security breach within 6 hours of coming to know of the information. So as soon as the company or the organizations come to know that a breach has occurred in their data vault, it has to report it to the CERTIN so that the CERTIN can take in necessary measures and protect the data. And CERTIN also gives various directions relating to the information security practices, what are the procedures and what is to be done to prevent and how to respond to cyber security incidents and how to report if such incidents take place. You can skip all these articles, they are not important for exam. Same with this news, you can skip all this. These are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.